Hey, what's up, everybody? It is Patrick Lovell, Saturday, June 3rd, 2022 23. Sorry, at nearly noon my time. And I'm in my wits' end. And yesterday I was, I don't know, feeling really, really dark. And, I recorded my truth bomb, which for those of you that are new to these, this is what I call Patrick Level Truth Bombs, the con. They're just riffs of me kind of sharing everything that I know and to try to intersect it with everything that's going on now to get your attention, to understand the information that I'm trying to get to you in a monumental way because this whole country is a shit show. And as I mentioned yesterday, in a very distraught kind of like this is the end of the road kind of way, and we're getting closer to the end of the road or to the next chapter. Not quite sure which is going to play out, but a lot of things are happening. And I happen to mention, and ironically, because there's been a lot of Roger Waters in the international news because of the sort of significance and the expression of everything that he's been doing forever with the wall and everything that illuminates and elicits and creates reaction and that sort of thing. But The Wall itself is a film that I've probably seen north of 100 times in my life. And there are these animated sequences where the protagonist, which is kind of an extension of this character that Roger Waters created for that prolific rock opera, where this person goes between feeling completely isolated and beat down by the system and surrounded by the wall, and then finding the way to destroy the wall. And it's this sequence and this pattern of chaos that inevitably winds up as a sort of fascist tendency, and that's what the human mind does, and that's what's on, that's what's expressed from Roger Waters in interpreting all of the things that he had to contend with his father losing his life in World War II, what it meant, everything that he ultimately learns in his life, and like many people in the UK that aren't born of the aristocracy, they became in a lot of ways socialist, in fact, directly socialist. And, I actually learned a lot about that sort of history from the wonderful television series Peaky Blinders, which I think does a fantastic job of illuminating that era, particularly between World War I and World War II. But that's exactly where Roger Waters is coming from. And then, of course, everything that comes from that, and that's not really the subject of this truth bomb. The subject of this truth bomb is what's going on and where we are at this stage of the game and what's on the line and all of these things that I try to articulate, I try to compel, I try to do it in a compelling way, to draw in everything that I've been in the midst of for literally my whole life, but the past 13 years specifically, that is exemplified, revealed, on display in my work that's not going to be around for much longer. And that's why I'm kind of a basket case, to be honest with you. You can currently find it at www.thecon.tv. And as a reminder, please like and subscribe and share if this hits on point and you want other people to understand what's going on and also to be a part of what it is that I'm going to lay out for you. But the work in the con reveals the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in history that never ended. The 2008 Great Financial Crisis was a massive international global racketeering enterprise that emanated from our financial system. It didn't happen overnight. It happened as a result of literally decades in the making. And what I didn't understand when I went through the 2008 Great Financial Crisis, and when I went through it, I had gone from being a highly paid executive producer, senior producer on a national television show, living the American Dream 101, aspiring to be everything that I've ever wanted to be in my life. And I finally found it by the time I was, in my late 30s, early 40s. Actually, it all ended when I turned 40, as a matter of fact, at that stage. And then it moved on to the next chapter, but which is what it is that I went on this monumental journey to be able to put the information and find the information and do the work that the entirety of the United States federal government failed to do. Congress failed to hold power to account on behalf of the American people, which is its actual constitution. That's the whole reason it exists. Same with the institutions that we've created in our democracy, such as the Department of Justice, the Federal Reserve, and the FBI and the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then a whole potpourri of other regulatory bodies, including state attorneys general around the country that are tasked with preventing everything that took place but didn't, and then in the aftermath, didn't solve the riddle, didn't hold it to account, which is why I had to go on a monumental journey to get the answers I did, which was a miracle. It took a lot of resources. It took a lot of energy. It took tens of thousands of effort, I'll tell you that, tens of thousands of miles underneath my wing to be able to go get the information. Unbelievable commitment, unbelievable sacrifice that ultimately cost us $4.5 million. But it was a drop in the bucket compared to what we found, which is what we realized, that this scam rug pulled over 50 million Americans directly and over 100 million people worldwide. It got people in the housing scenario, what we call homeowners, borrowers, people that refinance their homes, all different shapes and sizes of what happens within home finance. And then got on the other side of that, pensioners, working class people, people who had retired, saved their whole lives, that got blown up from this incredible disaster, this racketeering enterprise that nobody understood and nobody ever got to the bottom of. And I didn't understand because it didn't make sense after I'd actually gone through it myself. So I was a television producer, as a professional, college education, certainly his opinions of the world like we all do, but I, had been around the block, seen a lot of things in my life by the time I got to 40. And all of a sudden, the world turned upside down when I was the most vulnerable, to be honest with you. It'd be one thing if it was just me, but I had my family, and I was responsible for my family. And I was responsible for being in the situation that I was in, and then all of a sudden it got all destroyed. And it didn't make sense because I was in the trenches dealing with the aftermath, with all of the elements of the people that are involved with what happens when you go through a challenge, an entity called servicers that ultimately involves all sorts of different networks of people that are there to clean up the mess in the event that you go through a foreclosure, which has already been baked in. But it all changed in really the late 80s to the early 90s because what we created was mortgage-backed securities that ultimately, through all sorts of deregulation, which means that we just basically perverted the laws that we had created because of what took place during the Great Depression, only to reconfigure all of the elements of what created the Great Depression, which inevitably did the same thing. And I was none the wiser, just like millions of people, literally tens of millions of people, did not understand exactly what they had gotten into. And then ultimately, if they went through this whole problem, this meat grinder situation, where they wound up in some sort of dilemma where they were trying to modify their loans because they lost their income, or they got set up in any manner, shape, or form of a documentation fraud that basically created inverted payback programs. I've got a buzz in the background that's a little bit distracting, but there was like 40 different types of products that people got into that brokers would sell that they themselves didn't fully understand. They were just trying to close a deal. And in these like 50-page, 60-page documents, which were these mortgages, that people really didn't understand what was hidden in the fine print. And a lot of people got set up. They got set up on negative amortization loans that they didn't understand, or they got set up in loans that were, over the course of time would have massive increases to the payment schedule and things they didn't fully understand. And so if you don't understand what it is that happened, or if you haven't ever gotten into a home, or if you haven't taken out a mortgage, or if you don't have a college degree and you don't have a professional understanding of finance, a lot of what I'm telling you isn't something that's second nature, like maybe your favorite sport or your favorite a musician or favorite interest. This is something that you have to learn as you go through life. And ultimately, the entirety of our economy pretty much is central to home ownership. It makes sense if you just pull back your lens and just try to think about what it means for a family, the nuclear American family, and consumption, and what it takes to make that happen. So, home ownership is central to literally everything. And then it became central to the global economy. And it was all set up ultimately on a bunch of what we call deceptive acts and practices made possible by liar's loans that tricked a lot of people into a lot of things that they thought they were getting into a house that they could afford and they could flip, and many people did. But then haywire happened in the late 2008 period, and then ultimately blew up the world based on all of these laws that were deregulated in the late 90s. And today, nobody understands what happened. I mean, people have got bits and pieces, and then, of course, everybody who talks about this stuff likes to say, oh, yeah, we all know what happened. And I'm talking about, the Johnny-come-latelys, the folks like Russell Brand, and in some cases, even though they've been talking about this stuff for a long time, they never fully understood what they were dealing with. And I'm talking about Joe Rogan and other guys online, such as Jimmy Dore and many others. And most notably, recently, as of yesterday, which kind of set me sideways, a guy by the name of David Sirota, who I can't stand for personal reasons. But ultimately, nobody understands what exactly happened. And that's why my team and I had to go on this incredible journey to go do what the goddamn federal government that was working at the tune of $90 billion a year and tens of thousands of employees couldn't figure out, as well as the entirety of our elected officials. They all just basically swept it under the rug. We had investigations. We had different potpourri of revelations that reveal what it is that I put together in the con to reveal to the world, but nobody ever actually understood in media, particularly, what exactly the Department of Justice was saying in the settlements with the too big to fail banks. They were just press releases. $250 billion in fines to the banks for something that they never followed up on, because it's not their job to be critical, to do investigative journalism on behalf of the American people as the Fourth Estate. Somehow, somewhere between 1988-ish, 9-ish, and then ultimately on overdrive in the 2000s because of technology, investigative journalism got murdered. And ultimately, newspapers around the country, they got bought by hedge funds since the early 2000s. So when I blew up in 2008, and because I studied political science and I've been in the arena of power for a long time, I started asking questions because it didn't make sense, especially what happened to me directly. I knew I was getting played because I'm a business guy, and I've been an independent business guy for over 20 years, and I know sometimes you're on top and things are great, you don't have any problems, and sometimes things go sideways, and when they do, you typically have to renegotiate those things if you've got relationships with partners or somebody you owe money to, a creditor and that sort of thing, and you got to work out a deal, and you try to work your way out of it before you go bankrupt. I mean, really, that's the nature of capitalism and entrepreneurialism. And if you're somebody like me who is a producer who requires getting funding for projects. So that's who I am. I'm not a communist. I'm not a socialist. I have incredible respect for a lot of the academics, particularly, and activists that are socialist. I'll never be a communist, never even remotely interested in what could lead to everybody being on the same page with everything equal from a standpoint of you're told what to do. I'm too independent, and I love the dynamism of freedom and what people do to try to find ways to do innovative things to create markets. I think that's all absolutely spectacular and brilliant, but only just like if you build a building, and just like if you make a car, just like you make an airplane, the system has to run the way it's designed for it to function safely, so that those of us who want to purchase a car are going to do so knowing that the brakes aren't sabotaged to fail. Those are just kind of common sense things, and you expect, well, why would anybody, create a car with the brakes designed to fail? Because they could make a shit ton of fucking money on it if they were in the housing industry, based on everything that you don't understand and the world doesn't understand, which is what we put chapter and verse, soup to nuts in the con. And what the thing that sent me sideways yesterday above all else is I was looking at analytics that I didn't have access to before. And I found out that the numbers that have seen the entirety of the con, particularly the final 2 episodes, isn't very impressive. And therein lies the rub. That's why nobody knows what happened to this country that we laid out completely in the con that's been out there available to the public in a free market scenario where people hopefully could find it because of what I do and what others have done in advertising initially and everything else was the idea. But we never found the audience, even though there are tens of millions of people who went through this disaster. And I'm personally involved with different groups where there's like tens of thousands of people who are cocooned in like the end game in the courts, and they don't know the big picture of what happened. Everybody speculates based on everything, and everybody chases some sort of dragon. Everybody is like inundated with so much information, and you can only like absorb so much no matter how smart you are. And ultimately, where your interest lies and where you vector your bandwidth is where you're going to have an understanding of how things work, unless you get played, because of course that's all over the place too with misinformation. And so what's killing me is that here we spent $4.5 million to do the work that the government that got paid $90 billion a year with tens of thousands of employees couldn't pull off. That led to the ultimate criminal revelation. What we found because of our work, we realized that the entire system was a racketeering enterprise. If you've heard of racketeering, that's because that's what the mob does. And oh yeah, by the way, we have laws to hold the mob accountable, starting with Racketeering Influence Corrupt Organization, RICO. My partner, said at the very beginning of this, he was thinking of it all as a street crime, and he said, why isn't this whole thing RICO? And lo and behold, we found the only RICO conviction in the country based on the Pandora's box of a tragedy of a 91 year-old African American woman who was the embodiment of, trying to move forward from the massive, depravity of slavery and betrayal of slavery into Jim Crow and everything else, and the way we've treated African American people in this country from the very beginning, ultimately to realize through, the civil rights movement and then all of the efforts to basically, end redlining and other practices of financing to prevent African Americans from getting a piece of the American dream. That finally started to change in the late 60s, early 70s. And then ultimately this woman, Addie Polk, was sort of the representation of all of that, only to be set up and have her house stolen through the methodology of everything that I'm telling you. And because she knew she owned her house, and because she knew that she couldn't survive the streets or didn't want to go to the streets or live with the shame of going to the streets, she shot herself 5 times in the chest to commit suicide because she was trapped. That was it. It was done. Nowhere else to go. The American dream turned to American nightmare, which millions of us can relate to. And by the way, the exact same thing happened to millions of us, not the suicide part, but tens of thousands of people committed suicide. I can't tell you how many times I thought about it. The bottom line is that when the pressure gets so horrific, especially when you start to learn the ingredients that you got played, and ultimately what we learned and what many thousands of people are understanding now, like 15 years after the fact, is that the foreclosing parties, based on the rule of law in our courts around the country, are foreclosing illegally because of the nature of everything we show you in the con, which is a giant racketeering criminal enterprise. But it wasn't low-level guys that were part of like some local gang or a mob or something like that. No, it was fucking created and engineered by the CEOs of our financial system. Most notably, the 2 big to fail banks, which are supposedly, for most people, I mean, it's pretty impressive when you walk in Manhattan and you see these like 90-story office towers for Bank of America and Chase and these global super fortresses of financial legitimacy, you would think. And so they all have this composite sort of facade of integrity because you would expect that, but that's not the way it is. And more people are starting to understand because we see corruption everywhere. I mean, over the course of the last, let's call it 8 years, the veil of corruption is being pulled back, and more people are seeing more and more corruption. In fact, you see corruption in every direction. And the thing that gets crazy is that nobody can focus on any specific corruption because there's so much corruption. So it becomes a tool that it's like, well, what about them? Or, our guy did this, but it's not as bad as that guy did that, and that sort of thing. No, meanwhile, nobody can see the forest for the trees, which is what I continue to be in battle to try to get your attention, to make you understand, to try to have you come and understand all of the elements that I've put out there, so that you can finally have the eureka if you got through the whole thing and go, holy mother of God. The whole thing's been pissing on my head the whole time, lying to me, and I got to do something about it because my grandmother or my parents or somebody got fucking wiped out in this thing, and it destroyed me and it destroyed my life, and I still haven't gotten out of it. I'm seeing headlines all the time about how the millennials are suffering, and maybe Gen Z and all that sort of thing. The way this whole thing worked, and you've heard of disparity of wealth, the whole thing was a smash and grab, which is an ancient technique, particularly of imperialist powers, that just had a new version of it because of technology and lies that manifested tens of millions of felonies based on the racketeering enterprise that I give you. That's all manifested from what we call control fraud, which comes from the CEOs based on modern executive compensation because they get money by looting the system. So it's all a facade. It's not free markets. It's not, capitalism. Even though everybody wants to blame capitalism because capitalism is certainly a part of it from the standpoint that, yes, it's fucking capital. Yes, financial banks and investment banks all practice a version of capitalism. But what I'm telling you is it's not really, because it's racketeering. What you end up finding out is that you have corporate fascism undergirded by a criminal syndicate that uses then socialism, and that's the most important part. We're really socialist because we gave tens of trillions of dollars illegally to an illegal system. How can I get that through your head? The Federal Reserve, and I'm involved with all sorts of manner, shape, or form of economists, especially those that are actually good people on the right side of things that tend to want to ignore the fraud. And what I'm telling you, quantitative easing is one part of this, a very big part of it. But it was the Federal Reserve Act 13.3, which gives the incredible lending capacity, the full faith and credit of the United States in Federal Reserve Act 13.3. That was devised after the Great Depression, to be honest with you. But the way the statutes read is that you don't use the capacity of the Federal Reserve, the central bank, as lender of last resort to provide tens of trillions of dollars to a criminal apparatus that went bankrupt, that got that way through fraud, and that their collateral was worth nothing. And that's what they lent it on. The equivalent would be like me in 2008. Hey, you know what, bank? I got fucking in over my head. I can't afford what I'm paying because I'm spending too much money on my wife who wants, the big SUV in the garage and, all the food and drinks and everything that lived this perfect, beautiful lifestyle. And you know what? All of a sudden I lost my job, so I can't afford it anymore. So will you give me my salary times 1,000? That would be something similar, you stupid fucking morons that can't see the forest for the trees. The bottom line is it's socialism for criminals. And that's not the United States of America for any asshole who's opened up a fucking book about what the United States is supposed to be. Based on the goddamn revolution and the Bill of Rights and the Constitution and everything that goes with it. Separation of powers, which means the integrity of law and the legitimacy of law. When you build an aircraft carrier, it has to be built with precision to be able to do what it does. Does the United States have the capacity to be able to build aircraft carriers and deliver nuclear weapons wherever the fuck it wants, whenever the fuck it wants? Does that require precision? Oh yeah, it does. So how in the world is it possible that this country, that is probably, it's not going to be for long because of all of the things that are going on with the BRICS countries and potentially the dollar not being the global reserve currency and all of these changes that are manifesting right in front of our eyes, including all of the sum total of wars and continuation of wars and military budget and all sorts of other things. I mean, you want to get under the hood, you really want to understand about what's possible. It's called productive capacity and resources. That's what the value is. It's not fiat currency. Fiat currency is based on, that's the modicum of exchange, based on capacity, productive capacity and resources, which the United States has a lot of. So the dollar bill, the dollar, is extremely valuable, and it always will be, and it might not disappear tomorrow. But because of this system of finance that killed the golden goose 4 decades ago, we've created a globalism for the middleman, because the way it really works is you got the Fed plugging money into the system, monetary policy, that the financiers take out based on risk to create capital flows in businesses that are supposed to be for the most efficient and productive uses of capital in our society. That's the idea. But what they ended up doing was, through modern executive compensation and perversion of control fraud, through racketeering and all sorts of fucking psychological engineering, I'm having a hard time with words, psychological profile engineering and all that sort of thing, you get to be able to create this mythology based on the frequency of moving commodities. And in this case, the real estate was always real. That always had value, but that could be manipulated, because if you have an increased value of the wealth of the house, you could create mortgages and securities based on the value of that loan, and you could securitize it through the system. The idea being you could refinance it, because a rolling loan knows no loss. As long as the value of the real estate was going up, then no problem. People kept refinancing and refinancing. And yes, some used their house as an ATM. They did. They got over their skis. Was their mismanagement the reason the whole system blew up? Who was providing them the fuel? It's like blaming a drug addict. I mean, it's almost the same thing, really. Is the drug addict the guy who is responsible for him being addicted? For me, it's like, if you have laws and you're supposed to have a war on drugs, you're not supposed to allow cocaine all over the fucking place for people to become addicted to it, even though, of course, it happens. I came from the 90s. I've done cocaine myself. I liked it. I was never addicted to it, thank God. But the bottom line is, I can understand that, yeah, you got to have personal responsibility. And, oh, yeah, I believe in caveat emptor as well. But at the same time, the cocaine that you use to get high and have fun time at a concert and, whatever else comes with it, that sort of thing, is a little different than your house and the economy and everything else. But the fuel that made it all possible and the racketeering was crack cocaine for the fucking middlemen, because it was all bullshit, and it was all based on lies and deception and deceptive acts and practices. And is that illegal? Yes! It's illegal! In every direction, like you would not believe. Have you ever heard of Watergate? Are you aware that we got a president impeached, and of course he was pardoned and all that, but based on investigations that he broke the law because of all the things that were involved with Watergate? Now imagine something that's monumentally bigger than Watergate that nobody understands. Why? Because the fucking media is stupid, and they're not investigative journalists, and they have been. And I've been critical of Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper and all the rest of them forever. I've been watching them cherry pick different situations because I understand how to do investigations, because I'm an investigative journalist and a producer, and that's what I do. That's what I did to bring the story that they all kept hidden from you. And I've always said that this is going to lead to calamity. Well, it does, because corruption fuels fascism, and we're all over the place right now. And last night, I sat in on God damn it, I couldn't even believe it. I watched this HBO documentary that was fucking brilliantly produced, and about the Trumps. And I watched it and I was like, okay, let's see what this is all about, right? And as it turns out, I think the managing producer, or I can't remember what his exact title was, but of course it was Donald Trump. So the whole thing had to be approved by Trump and everybody in the Trump universe. And what that means is it was an infomercial, which is propaganda on HBO. Now, HBO is supposed to be like, the gold standard for documentaries for, the last 30 years, going back to Sheila Evans. Well, it's not now, not even remotely. Now, think about the mergers and acquisitions. We had, Time Warner become, Discovery HBO, which became Max, which, you have all of these, mergers and acquisitions, and then it becomes about the eyeballs, which means fucking nothing. A sucker's born every minute. Barnum and Bailey, you sell a fucking ticket. It's all about eyeballs. And Donald Trump's got a whole lot of millions of eyeballs of fucking idiots that don't know how the country is supposed to work. They're justifiably pissed off But they don't even have the very beginning of inclination of laws and separation of power, nor do they care if they support an asshole like Trump. That guy is a bloviating, fat, fucking lying pig that got away with, I don't know, among other things, 200, 300 different versions of racket control fraud, hyperinflating assets, his entire business model. Okay, that's one thing. But he had liar's loans guaranteed with Trump mortgages, what he learned from the whole system. And then he got busted for $25 million for predatory lending at Trump University. And then he's been, laundering money for the Russians, even though, a lot of people are like, there's no collusion. No collusion. Deutsche Bank is the connection between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. But you know what? A lot of guys have figured out we can get eyeballs if we talk about Biden's laptop or, Hunter Biden's laptop because, oh, wow, look at the corruption there in Burisma. Yeah, there's corruption there. Compared to what? 9/11 in Saudi Arabia and Trump saying nobody ever got to the bottom of 9/11, so what are you going to do? Meanwhile, what I reveal to you is that $29 trillion were plowed into the financial system that buried the world, that used the courts with the legal documentation fraud, all of which should have gotten everybody kicked out of their jobs, the money pulled back in finance, but in the courts, the judges should have been fucking kicked out for life and basically made to do the walk of shame because, my God, they had evidence of the fraud that they're stealing people's houses on top of, a looting job, a seismic looting job of Wall Street. They got tens of trillions of dollars from the folk faith and credit of the United States, which was all illegal. And now we're going to take down the con because there is no commercial interest in truth. There is no value for truth. I fight for liberty and justice for all. I believe in dynamism. I believe in the integrity of law. I don't care what your religion is. I don't care what your creed right now. I do care. I want everybody to live free. I want everybody to thrive. I want everybody to be dynamic. I want to see the American dream in every direction. That's not what I'm seeing, nor is it what I'm living. I'm seeing the American nightmare. And it's all because the ultimate rich, they're being placated by a financial system of thieves. We just increased the mother lode of all assets, okay? And we literally, the socialism for the rich, it's like this, 0% interest in, you get to finance and make commercial products and everything else. Oh yeah, meanwhile, the guys who took the risk on this, the developers, they sold it through some commercial mortgage-backed securities and the Fed's holding on to it. Even though we've got, I don't know how much insane commercial real estate calamity on the horizon, because if you look around at all the big cities, San Francisco and New York and everywhere else, there is so much inventory, and yet the prices are so high. So the Fed's going to have to, they're talking about missing a month in terms of increasing interest rates. But at the end of the day, this whole fucking shellacking is just to maintain the value of the assets of the rich, which is aristocracy. Or, some manner, shape, or form, when it creates fascism, some diabolical, Mussolini fascism, right? Corruption births fascism. Look, I'm so fucking sorry to yell, except your entire fucking country depends on it. And we've got the technology, the know-how, and the resources to re-engineer the paradigm. We don't have to be stuck on fossil fuel. If we spent $4.7 trillion on the energy infrastructure grid 20 fucking years ago, we would already be way past this, and we'd have real jobs where people had houses where they could grow their kids and they could go to college, and everybody lives happily ever after. And I'm seeing pictures of all of these kids that I was in the community with that are all graduating and going on to college and getting in their expensive cars, and most of their parents are in finance or real estate. I could have done that a long time ago. I should have done a long time ago. But I studied political science. I care about our democracy. I believe in liberty and justice for all. I hate fascism above all, well, corruption and fascism above all else. And look, man, I made my choice, and I just got divorced yesterday, okay? 22 years, divorced. My son, who was a spectacular athlete, he didn't get the chance to be, everything that I had dreamed that could have happened because I was chasing this, which creates uncertainty, and my wife had a real significant problem with uncertainty, and I don't blame her, as we all should, quite frankly. And so it didn't work. I couldn't provide. What's the irony of that? I'm like this amalgamation and epitome of the American dream. Oh, who's that sound like? Addie Polk? Yeah. I mean, we're pulling off the con at the end of the month. This whole story is going to disappear from history, and they got away with it. I can't penetrate the bubble with millions of you who are looking for the answers. You really are. You just don't know where to look, and you don't know. You got to do a little bit of work yourself to engage to understand this stuff. For us to change this situation, this horrific situation, it wouldn't take our entire country to be on the same page. It'd take maybe 10% of us at best. That's a lot of people. And I'm actually trying to just get a few people on board initially to, join this movement, a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption. And we're looking for a $13 buy-in. And if you invest $13, then, there'd have to be 347,000 of you to match what we've already put into this. So there's that. But if you invest and you get 13 other people, then hopefully we'll start to break through the Borg. Because I've got all the answers. I got 300 hours on the shelf. I know everywhere to look. I've got all the guys to talk to. I can bring this to the American people. The idea is I'm going to do a podcast first, and then hopefully going to do a barnstorming tour, kind of like a Live Aid, if you will, but against corruption. I want to create a civil rights revolution against corruption. Hopefully it's a peaceful one. And I want to wind up in Washington, D.C. next summer with, my dream would be, probably millions of people with us, emboldened with the truth that the entirety of media, the entirety of our government hid from us for the rich. And are all rich people bad people? No. If you're a doctor, if you're an athlete, if you're somebody who's found success and you work in this system or the system benefits you, are you the guy that is the problem? No. No, you're not. No, it's the system that created the control fraud through modern executive compensation, through all these perverse incentives that were all illegal. That's the problem. And then the other side of the equation is the law, the Department of Justice, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the AGs, those who are given the power to hold power account on behalf of the citizenry of the United States based on the Constitution, that nobody is above the law. Those people have to do their job, which they're not. Why is Donald Trump still breathing fresh air? Why is he on HBO? And of course, I'm struggling to get your attention. Well, because of everything I've told you. If we had tens of millions of eyeballs, oh, you bet your ass that the executives at HBO would be like, oh, Patrick, let's do a deal. Yeah, because I already did the fucking hard work to bring it. You know what I would love to say at that point? Fuck you. People are getting it on my website, motherfuckers. I'll use capitalism to exploit the fucking criminality in these assholes that destroyed the world. That's really what I want to do. But don't misinterpret that as I'm going to, exploit everybody that I work with. That's not how it works in my business. We collaborate. We respect each other. You get paid what you can get paid based on the system, and usually the guy that puts it together takes the risk to put it all together, and he gets the upside. Now, in my case, what's a good upside? Probably 20, 30%. I don't know. It depends on what the deal is. Depends on what it brings in. Does it matter if you got tens of millions of people watching it? No. I'd spend a whole lot of money on fucking cleaning this goddamn system up. And also on the unfortunate reality of, homeless people all over the country. They got train wrecked by this shit. In addition to some other things. We just saw the debt ceiling, right? It was all about, this political mishigas, which is bullshit to take our attention away from the reality. There is no real debt ceiling in the United States. It's self, created because we're a sovereign currency. We can create whatever we need to. The only problem you have with fiat currency in that situation is you get hyperinflation if you don't play it right based on the methodology of employment, low inflation, consumption. You have to have a balance, which comes through productive capacity and resources. Okay, so those are all part and parcel to the whole thing. So look, I guess I made my point. Maybe not. I don't know. It seems like it's impossible to penetrate most people's minds because, and I'll finish up with this. I had a couple of people say to me, okay, Patrick, it's one thing to raise your fist in the air. What are we going to do? What do you mean? What are we going to do? What you should do is understand what we put in the con for another 28 days before it disappears, so you're actually educated to how the corruption worked and what we know the federal government let Wall Street get away with and how. It was a cover-up of a massive crime because of what I told you the Fed did, which you also need to know. And then you tell 13 people, and they tell 13 people, and like the Breck commercial, so on and so on and so on. Unless you want to live in a stagnant freaking pool of freaking thieves, a den of thieves and just rich people like all aristocracies throughout history. Is that your idea of being an American? It's not mine. I like competition. But at the bottom, but the baseline, if I'm going to get on a football field, do I want to play with a game that's been rigged and I know the refs are going to cheat and destroy the game and everything else? You know, with a bunch of guys that were handpicked that are the best there are, they're going to pummel you. No, I don't want to get on that field. I want to get on a field where there's a chance to play and actually win. That's how you compete on an even playing field. But we have socialism for the rich, as opposed to social safety nets for people bouncing out of a bad thing, maybe getting help that they need, moving on to the next thing, and then becoming productive members of society, which is what would happen if I was in charge, to be quite honest with you. But if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did anybody hear it? Yes. Except to the fool, the tool in the fool circus who can't see the forest for the trees, which I'm trying to illuminate to you and pull the curtains back and shine a big heavy light on what the fuck is really going on, because there's nothing more important. Unless you want to live in a fucking fascist state where white people can basically, enslave people of color. If that's your idea, then keep doing what you're doing. I'll probably be okay in that game. Except when the Nazis come and they want to murder the fucking Jews. And I'm Jewish, even though I come from a half family. And yet there's Jews that are a part of this problem. It's a conundrum. But it's not a conundrum we can't fix. Everything can be fixed. I can lead us. Okay? I can lead us because I've got the information. Do I walk on water? Did I part the Red Sea? No, I did the work. Maybe those guys did too. Maybe that's what it was all about. Maybe they did the work. I did the work. I've got the work that's going to disappear. I have the access. I'm a guy that, literally I'm going to do some stuff on Tuesday or Wednesday with some of the most brilliant people on the planet. They're going to take this, next level in terms of really the academics of this aspect of it all in a way that are far beyond my capacity to be able to give you all the details of what they can. But I can certainly give you a lot of details, but I'm the guy that can hopefully talk to the masses. Look, I want you to be healthy. I want you to be strong. I want you to be safe. I want you to have opportunity. I want the system to work. I don't want the police industrial complex to basically shoot black guys in the back that are unarmed. It's completely, absolutely insane, utterly unacceptable. I would like businesses who come up with great ideas to get funding and, do what they got to do in the right way to be able to create jobs and dynamic stuff in the market, rewards and all that kind of thing. That all makes beautiful sense to me. What doesn't make sense are monopolies. That's why we had trust busting from, Teddy Roosevelt, which actually came off the wave of all the progressive movements back in the late 1800s, early 1900s that became, the workers and the farmers sort of movements, and of course the women's suffrage and the early civil rights movement and the early environmental movement. They all converged into Teddy Roosevelt and trust busting. And then his cousin later, after the Great Depression, FDR, was the New Deal and everything that led us to defeat fascism. And, FDR says it all the time. And by the way, I learned recently that FDR's grandfather was into the opium trade. So like a lot of rich people, they had their fingers in the underworld, which is what a lot of people in the United States do. And there's this whole other side of this thing with, dark money and dark money interest in the mob and things under the, in the closet. And then, of course, CIA. I mean, that's a whole nother aspect of this whole thing that creates the whole. But the bottom line is that the people are not in control of the United States. The corruption is. And that's what I'm trying to break. And I need tens of millions of you to join me. There is no more important mission. Why? Because like Teddy Roosevelt's trust busting and the New Deal, this is the clean New Deal. You cannot end any of these problems that we're talking about. If you're on the progressive side, if you're on the Democratic side, if you're on the educated side, if you, me, and everybody you see who isn't a Nazi, who believes in decency, in dignity, in integrity and liberty and sustainability, and we merge in unity, We will defeat the misery of tyranny, and we will usher in a new clean deal, which will be the redemption of what we have to do anyway. We don't have a choice. We have polluted the planet beyond repair unless we have a massive catharsis, and it begins with purging corruption. And then, ironically, and it makes a lot of sense, does it not, that we purge pollution. I've said this a million times, but I don't know if I believe it. It's up to you. If you, me, and everybody you see do this, you plus me equals we the people. Failure is not an option because we're not going to survive this. The only way we can find the fortitude and the inspiration to do this is if we together rise, roar, and revolt against corruption. And as far as I can see, that the only way we're going to do that is to climb to the peak of the mountain and above the pollution, which is onwards and upwards. Will you please join me? Will you please believe me? If you've got to do background on me, do whatever you got to do. Check out all my work. I've got literally hundreds, if not thousands of hours on Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube. And, between that and our Real Progressives, the New Untouchables, which is a fabulous podcast, and then also everything on TikTok. You put it all together, including the con. I've been doing this for 3 solid years at the expense of everything, and I decided I'm going to make my case today because the sand is running out of the hourglass for me to achieve this, but it's also running out for you. That's the whole point. I've got the answers that can take this whole system down. You have got to join me, and together we will rise to the moment. Thanks for listening.